Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Parenting in a Digital World. This webinar is a part of our 5-week free webinar series, Coping with COVID-19, where each week our mental health experts share their knowledge and other resources on topics, including finding balance in managing expectations, preventing loneliness and isolation, stress management, and more. And you can find a list of all of our upcoming and on-demand webinars at jcmh.org. A little bit about Jefferson Center. We've been serving Jefferson County, Clear Creek County, and Gilpin County for over 60 years. We're a nonprofit, community-focused mental health care and substance use services provider. We offer hope and support to individuals and families who are struggling with mental health issues and substance use disorders. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsor for today. Financial support from this webinar is provided by the Rotary Club of Golden. Thank you for being an advocate for mental health in our community. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Joel Smith, who is a trauma clinician here at Jefferson Center. And before I hand the mic over to Joel, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation. First, this webinar will be available on demand after the live session, and we'll email that out to you, and we'll also have today's slide deck available. For the best viewing experience, please keep your microphones muted and turn off your video during the presentation. And you'll also want to change your Zoom view to speaker mode. Next, we'd love to hear from you during the presentation today. If you have a question for Joel, please feel free to send it through the chat at the bottom of your player, and we'll be answering questions at the end of the webinar. And if we don't get to your question today, we'll be sure to follow up afterwards. And last, we'd like to encourage you to follow us on our social networks and share the recording of this webinar and other information about Jefferson Center. And so without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Joel. Joel, over to you.
Thank you. Hello all, happy Monday. Happy apocalypse is also what I've been telling people. My name's Joel. I've been a therapist here in Colorado for about 21 years, which always makes me feel older every time I add a digit to that number. For almost the entire time of that 21 years, I've been practicing therapy with people who have had a lot of trauma in their lives, addiction issues, and I've also been working with kids and families. I've been working at Jefferson Center for about the past 4 years or so. Dumb things about me, I like asparagus. Like seriously, it's a fixation. They're green, they're long, they're yummy, they're good with pepper. Eat them, they're wonderful. I'm good at baking, but bad at layups. If you ever want to see anybody do anything so funny that you will die, watch me do a layup, and I promise it's super funny. I think we already kind of talked a little bit about what Jefferson Center is and what we provide, but just to kind of build on what was already said, I want to mention some specific services that Jefferson Center offers. We offer outpatient therapy for just about everything. So if you have a mental health issue that runs the gambit from anxiety to depression to addiction issues to some pretty significant mental illness, or you just need somebody to talk to you for stability and support, all of those services are available on both the child, the adult, the family level. All that kind of good stuff is what we're doing. We offer medical services for psychiatry. We offer wellness and classes on those levels. We have counselors in schools and nursing homes. We attend to veterans. We do just a little bit about everything. So if you have a need or you have a question, if we don't offer it ourselves, we can probably point you in the right direction. And our information will be provided as we go. So don't hesitate to ask, how do I get hooked up? Or about anything else I'm gonna talk about tonight too. What I want to talk about tonight is right here. So I'm going to talk mostly about parenting in the age of social media. We're spending so much time as parents with our kids online today. Some of that is completely unavoidable because classes are online right now. But Also, while they're online on class, you know that they're involved in social media, you know that they're watching videos, you know that they're doing things that aren't strictly education related. Even before all this and when all this is going to be done, uh, social media plays an increasingly large role in our children's lives and in our own lives. And I want to talk about some specific issues as they relate to social media. The first one is I want to talk about how bullying is a factor in social media. I want to talk about how that plays out, how it's different than how it plays out in life in real person, but also kind of how it's the same. The second thing is I want to talk about media and body image and how the more we look at perfect people, maybe the less good we feel about ourselves, and how media impacts that process negatively and maybe even positively. I want to talk about both. I'm going to talk about media and suicide and how social media might impact the role and the prevalence of depression and anxiety such that people might have suicidal thoughts, and how that plays a factor in our kids' lives. I also want to address on all three of those issues how parents can play a vital role in raising healthy kids and intervening should something go wrong, and how to ask for help, or maybe just how to set up the boundaries so that maybe, hopefully, nothing goes wrong to begin with. I want to talk about what level of screen time is healthy for our kids. There's a lot of discussion about that, and there's not necessarily a lot of agreement. I'm going to say that up front. But there are some useful guidelines that I think we can all get on board with, and I want to talk about those. At the end, or maybe at a couple points in the middle, I want to talk about any questions that you might have, and we'll discuss those a little bit. Coolio? So here we go. What the heck is bullying? I really love this definition. It's from the Colorado Department of Education. Bullying is any written or verbal expression or physical or electronic act or gesture or pattern thereof that is intended to coerce, intimidate, or cause any physical, mental, or emotional harm to any student. This is a student-driven definition, so if you want to replace the word student at the end with adult or coworker or anything that is outside the realm of children, I think it certainly applies. We know that bullying doesn't stop when we turn 18. I am going to focus this bullying conversation on children, and that's why I chose a Colorado Department of Education definition, aside from the fact that I liked it. That really covers everything in the definition. It's anything that somebody says to me, it's anything that somebody writes to me, it's anything that is like a gesture or like a pantomime or anything that somebody kind of does that makes me feel unsafe or uncomfortable, anything at all. I also like that this definition allows the victim of the bullying to decide whether or not the victim is being bullied. So all of those factors go into why I chose this definition. How is cyberbullying different than bullying as it plays out in person? Something I want to highlight is the idea that when we as parents were kids, we did not deal with this. We did not have phones in our pockets. We did not have computers upon which we Facebooked and tweeted and all the other kinds of apps and profile apps that are out there. We didn't have to deal with this. The idea that we're parenting our kids on something that we did not have to deal with ourselves as a generation is fairly unique. And so we didn't come with, like any other parenting issue, like potty training or how to dress or how to interact with our peers or how to make friends or how to do any of those things. We have some kind of knowledge about intrinsically because we can remember how we were raised and then do something that aligns with that. We can either choose for ourselves, oh, I like how my parents did this with me, I'm gonna do it this way too. Or we can absolutely choose the way that my parents parented me made no sense and it didn't work, I'm gonna do something different. In this setting, we have no idea how to parent our kids with this. We kind of make it up as we go along. The best we can do is seek out other parents and see what they're doing. We can ask some experts, and we can also just kind of check in with our kids and make up the rules as we go along as we think it's working or whatnot. But this is brand new for parents, this kind of parenting on social media. So how is cyberbullying different than in-life person? The first one I have there, it is constant. It is 24/7. The bully can always find the victim. The only way the victim cannot be found is if he turns off his device and never looks at it. That's the only real way a victim of cyberbullying can maintain 100% safety is if he or she avoids the internet. We know that that's not realistic in today's world. The internet is necessary. A lot of our jobs depend upon the internet. We wouldn't be talking right now without the internet. A lot of school is dependent on the internet. There's really no way that we can avoid the internet. So staying 100% off is not an option. Having said that, I'm going to talk about some ways that we can increase safety and increase boundaries so that our kids can feel safe online. One of the other ways cyberbullying is different from in-person bullying is that the bully often thinks that there are no perceived consequences to the bullying. They can be anonymous. They can have a fake profile. They can sneak in. They can log out. And often the message that they have communicated to the victim of the bullying stays, and the bully can jet out and he can think, nothing's going to happen to me. And often they're right. Often there are no consequences to the bullying when it's online. Something I mentioned just a second ago is the complete anonymity that a bully can either perceive that he has or really in reality have. If a bully logs on to a social media program, they can pick a picture that doesn't look like them. They can choose a name that isn't their name and be completely different than the person they really are. We can have absolutely no idea who the person is who's doing the bullying. Also, a lot of social media sites protect that very policy that maintains their anonymity. While a lot of media sites have anti-bullying rules and policies, they also have anti-privacy policies. So the person who bullied your kid can maintain privacy, and the website or the social media app can discipline the bully as they see fit, but you might never know who it was. There really is a lot of anonymity online. The messages from the bully stay. That's another way that cyberbullying is different. In person, in real life, a bully can walk up and say whatever they say or do whatever they do to the victim, and it's done, it's over, and the memory of it stays. But online, the actual words stay. And if you're the victim of bullying, odds are the words and the actions of your bully stick around in your head, and you just perseverate over it over and over and over again. It can be really intrusive. It's so intrusive that the victims often and do go back to the actual words on the screen where they were bullied and read it over and over again, checking, why did this person say this to me? Is it true? Am I reading it wrong? Is this really happening? And they ask all these questions to themselves about the message. The messages from the bully stay. They can be very difficult to remove and they can be very difficult to delete. Again, social media websites and apps have lots of rules around bullying, but they vary kind of wildly. And if you've ever tried, for example, to get Facebook or Twitter, which are two big sites that a lot of people use, kids use a little bit less nowadays, but I'm using those as examples. Get them to remove something that someone said that you think is unkind or disparaging against yourself. It's really difficult. And I think we can find that difficulty all over the internet everywhere. Why am I talking about bullying? What's the big deal? Here are some of the effects of cyberbullying. One of them is decreased self-esteem from your kid or from the victim, the person who is being bullied. They can feel less good about themselves. They can be more depressed. They can have increased suicidal thoughts. They can, this is increased if the person is both doing in-person bullying and then stalking them later online. If that kind of bullying is omnipresent, if it's everywhere, it can really be very bad for a kid because they feel like they can't escape it and they have no control over their lives or what messages are being fed into their brains. All of these things then in turn create possibly, and sometimes likely, truancy. The kid may not go to school, they may not go to work if they have a work situation. They can have increased physical health issues. We have long known that mental health issues can make it more likely for someone to have physical health issues. So if your kid is saying as a result of being bullied that he has headaches, that he has nausea, that he's tired and fatigued all the time because maybe he's not sleeping well, he can have muscle cramps, he can have poor diet issues, which leads in turn to other things, and sleep issues lead in turn to other things. So all of these things can cause physical health issues. They can, a kid who has been bullied for a long time or severely for a short period of time can have an increased likelihood of substance abuse. And when I say substance abuse, I mean the gambit of whatever you think substance abuse is. I mean, everything from cigarette smoking to meth. If a kid is bullied, the likelihood that he will develop a substance abuse issue goes up quite a bit. And it goes up the longer he's being bullied. The other obvious factor is if a kid's being bullied, he may not feel safe at school, and therefore his level of concentration goes down. That has, of course, a direct impact on his grades, and a kid's grades may go down as a result of being bullied. This is just a list of some of the negative effects of being bullied, and of course there are more, including suicidal thoughts, which I think is the worst. Perhaps debate me later, but it's certainly a horrible symptom of being bullied. Kids can feel like they have no value and that they dread every single day of their lives, and they feel like they have no option but to remove themselves from the planet because life isn't worth living, and they can have a lot of suicidal thoughts. I'm going to talk about suicide specifically at the end of this presentation and give you more information on it. Bullied kids are more at risk of a lot of different kinds of things. I can't do that. Okay, never mind, I'll make it up. I'm having a technical difficulty, no big deal. Bullied kids are more at risk for a lot of different kinds of things. One of them that I put up here first was the idea that sex offenders prey on kids who have poor self-esteem, which is one of the reasons why I highlighted the idea that bullying causes poor self-esteem in kids. Think about it, it makes sense, it's gruesome and it's brutal and it's dirty and nobody wants to think about this, but it's true and it's dangerous, and that's something that we should be mindful of for our kids. Sex offenders happen. Sex offenders prey on kids with self-esteem issues. If you have a self-esteem issue, you might be looking for somebody who is nice to you. You might be looking for somebody who makes you feel safe for a second, even though you're not. You might even be willing to barter for someone to guard you or protect you in exchange for doing something else. And sometimes that sexual thing is the something else. Not trying to be creepy or scare people, I'm trying to encourage people to be mindful. Sex offenders happen and they prey on kids with poor self-esteem. Those are, and when I say sex offenders, I mean kids and adults. It's not just the creepy old guy in the van stereotype. These can be perhaps popular kids at school. These can be anybody. Sex offenders can be anybody. Isolated and depressed kids, the second thing on here, are at greater risk of suicide. If somebody is bullied and they feel like they aren't safe around anybody, they can believe that they're not even worth asking somebody to help them. And so the more isolated they get, the greater likelihood that they'll be depressed, and then of course the greater likelihood that they also have some suicidal thoughts with that. If we see our kids online all the time, and we see them on their phones all the time, and they would rather spend time online than with actual people. I'll talk more about that idea later in the presentation, but it's a risk for them to feel isolated, and that isolation furthers the amount of depression they may feel. Scared kids with low self-esteem are more likely to drop out of school, commit a crime, have an unwanted pregnancy, get an STD, engage in drug trafficking, engage in sex trafficking, and more. These are some of the risky behaviors that kids can engage in as a result of bullying. In Colorado, what is Colorado law? What I want to highlight is the idea that this law is not in criminal law, it is in educational law. And so I'll talk about why that's important after I read it. But Colorado statute forbids bullying, period. And it lists all of these, I'll let you read them for yourself, but it lists all of these statuses that people can have upon which bullying is made illegal. Why it's important to say this is educational law in Colorado, not criminal law. If it were criminal law, somebody could break a law and they could get arrested, and then maybe they could be put on probation or maybe go to jail or maybe something like that. That's not what happens here. In educational law, the school, not a court, is responsible for figuring out what the discipline for violating the law is. So the school can do things like offer detention, they can suspend, they can expel, they can have a thing called, my brain isn't working, but what they do is they responsibly put both the aggressor and the victim in a room, and they can have a moderated conversation between these two people, and then follow up periodically. And believe it or not, those kinds of conversations work, and they're often very successful in creating at least a neutrality between the bully and the victim, if not sometimes even a working friendship, believe it or not. These kinds of issues can be fixed with some adult supervision and guidance. So what I want to highlight is that the school is responsible for carrying out the discipline in bullying cases. These are examples of cyberbullying prevention. Encourage your kids to tell you about bullying. So if they are bullied either in person or if they are bullied online, you want your kids to tell you or to tell an adult around them and then you. But you definitely want to be in the loop when your kids are bullied. You want to know online what sites or what apps your kids are using. And you want to know that from the moment you give them a device. So if it's too late, parents, I'm sorry. But ideally, you want to have a sit-down conversation with your kid and say, okay, I'm going to get you a phone, but here are the rules. I need to know what your sites are. I'm going to have all of your passwords. I'm going to periodically check into your apps and just kind of see what's going on. And that's how it's going to be. If you don't do these things, kids, there's going to be consequences, and those consequences may include not having a phone anymore or whatever. That's how it should be. Your kids can get into a lot of trouble electronically. Their level of freedom and power goes up from here to whoo, the second they have access to information and online stuff. And they're going to push limits like they push anywhere else. They will push online. And the only way to make sure that the rules you would have for them are being followed is if you monitor them. So absolutely, sometimes parents are like, oh, but I want to maintain their privacy. And absolutely, you want to decrease those supervision limits as they are appropriate, as your kid gets older and more mature and more responsible. But initially, you want to have a lot of checking over what they're looking at and what they're reading. Know your kids' devices in and out. So know what their devices can do. For example, some parents don't know that while they're playing their game system, they're also chatting on their game system to their friends online. They can also be bullied on their game system. So know your kids' devices and know what they can do and what kind of communication they can have with other people on their game systems and other devices. Be aware of parental controls on all of the devices your kids interact with, and know what those controls will allow you to do and what they will not allow you to do. For example, parental controls often will let you turn off a device by simply turning off Wi-Fi. Parental controls can say you can log into an app at a certain time and log out at a certain time and prevent your kids from doing that. I'm just saying, be aware of what those controls are and how those controls can limit what your kids do and how they're engaging with their apps and profiles. Something I really encourage a lot of parents to do, and kids hate this, but hey, I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to be a friend on your kids' social media profiles, whatever profile that would be. One of the reasons for that is that you get to spend time with your kids on social media. Let me back up just a second. Because I'm talking about bullying, I'm talking about all of the worst things about social media. It's not all bad. Kids like to share things that are really important to them on social media. Kids like to post pretty things. Kids like to post their puppies and cats. Kids like to share their sports accomplishments or a grade. Kids like to post funny pictures of themselves and just kind of be fun with their friends online. All of that is fine. Of course, there's bullying that happens too. But if you're your friend on social media with your kids, you get to share all of the good stuff. And it's one of the ways that parents get to spend cool time with their kids, oddly and separately. But also you keep track of them, who they're spending time with, what they're saying, and all that kind of stuff too. And what bullying may be happening to them online. Also, your presence on their app makes it less likely for a bully to say something because they're like, oh, sorry, Mr. Rodriguez is on, and then they back off. So those are some of the things. Also invite trusted adults to friend your kids also, whether that's your best friend at work or it should be somebody your kid knows, like not a stranger, but like a grandparent or that mom's best friend for 30 years that your kids call Aunt Martha, and somebody like that. It should be somebody that your kids know. When I say trusted adult, somebody your kids trust. Here are some cyberbullying prevention rules and boundaries. When it comes to what apps and what social media profiles or any website a kid wants to use, especially initially, but you can have more relaxation as your kid gets older and wiser and more responsible, right? But initially, parents decide what sites your kids are using. Parents decide what apps your kids are using. Parents decide everything. Where your kid goes is exactly the parent's choice. Your kids are going to argue with you about that, especially when especially when they become teenagers and when they know more than you, because teenagers will try to convince you of that. But like any other decision you make, you are the parent and you get to decide what's best for them. In the same way that you wouldn't allow your kids to go to a party where you know there's going to be lots of sex and drugs, why would you let your kid go to a website where all the kids are talking about going to a party where there's going to be lots of sex and drugs? It's the same kind of rule making, and that makes sense. The next one on here: parents teach kids to be socially responsible and careful. So in the same way that you would have your kid go to a sleepover with a lot of other kids, and you might prep them about what the rules are, about how to be polite, how to be responsible, call me if something happens. You want to teach your kids the same rules when they go on social media. You want to teach them that their words stay. You want to teach them that you shouldn't say to somebody online something that you wouldn't tell them in person. You want to model for them how to have the boundary where if you disagree with somebody, you can say nothing at all. All of those kinds of things are important to model nowadays, even before they get on. So it's okay, and maybe you should, have your kids look at your own social media pages. Have your kids spend some time on Facebook with you and see how you navigate some things. And that can be really important. Talk to your kids about what privacy settings are. It's okay to share with your friends and loved ones the address of where you just moved, but you don't want the whole world to know that. And so privacy settings, who can see what I'm posting, are good for kids to know, because kids don't think of those things. So have privacy settings. It is okay to block inappropriate users. So sometimes kids are like, well, what do I do? This person is being mean to me and I don't know how to handle that. Teach your kids it's okay to just block them. You don't have to deal with it at all. They don't have to have access to what you're saying or what you're doing. You can just block them. Teach your kids to keep your passwords safe. A lot of kids are like, you're my friend, I've known you for 2 days, here's my password. And we want to teach kids way ahead of time that these things are not okay. Passwords are for you, the parent, and for the kid. They shouldn't be shared with anybody else. Finally, there's more stuff, but finally on this list at least, we want to ask schools about what their own bullying policies are from the get-go. Very often, I'm not trying to bash schools, but very often, when you don't know what the rules are ahead of time and then you run into a bullying issue, schools will downplay what their rules and policies are. It is true, to save themselves some work and responsibility. But if you ask them ahead of time what the rules and policies are and ask for a written copy, it helps you know what your rights are as a parent, what the kids' rights are as a student, and to help you push the school to take responsibility for what its role is in disciplining a bully. Cyberbullying prevention is what we're talking about right now. It is okay for kids to not respond to a bully. In fact, they should not. What they should do is tell an adult immediately. Very often, if kids are at school, they should tell a teacher or a staff member, a counselor, somebody. Right now, kids are not at school, they're with you. So kids, if they are bullied, should be talking to you and have those conversations with your kids. Have them know that you are there to be helpful. Having said that, it's a complicated world right now, and so I've asked various schools about this question, and I've gotten mixed answers. So here's my question. It has been, what happens if my kid, who is being educated remotely while at home, but by the school, is bullied during the school day by somebody who they would normally attend classes with, and it's online? Is that the school's responsibility, or is that an online thing that a parent just has to somehow deal with? I've had schools say, yep, this is our responsibility, talk to us about it, we'll help out. And I've had schools say, it's a weird issue right now, and I would encourage you to ask schools ahead of time what their policy is about how they're handling that, and that can help you out in the future, like I said a minute ago. If the kid is bullied, if they have the foresight and the self-awareness in the moment to do it, encourage them to take a screenshot of the interaction in which they were bullied online. The reason for that is that if you have a picture of it, the bully can't delete it later. I mean, he can, but then you still have proof of it, is what I'm saying. So in the future, you can report the bully's behavior to the app or to the website, and you can say, here, as you're emailing them or whatever, I have proof, and then email the picture with your complaint about the bully. Again, different websites and apps have different policies about bullying, but sending a picture of an actual interaction, if it no longer exists, seems to be meaningful to the websites and the apps. The kid can and should block the bully. Very often, kids don't actually want to do this. The bully sometimes is, he's popular, or she's pretty, or whatever it is. Or they feel guilty for blocking the bully, even though they were the one who has their feelings hurt. So encourage kids from the get-go, before it happens, that they can block someone who they're having an unpleasant interaction with, let alone a bully. There are some occasions when these steps are not sufficient. There are some occasions when bullying transcends something that is illegal on a school education level to something that is more illegal on a criminal level. And here are some examples of that. If your kid is being sent pornographic images, that's not okay. That is not bullying. It is not merely bullying. It is also child porn because your kid is being sent porn. Then you absolutely should let the school know, but also call the police. It's illegal. Other things on this list are when your kid has a picture taken of them in a private situation and that picture is being used to blackmail them or to threaten them in some way, that is illegal. It is not merely bullying, it is illegal. If your kid is being stalked online, if your kid is being threatened with a hate crime, if your kid is being violent or being shown pictures of violence in a way that makes them feel unsafe, all of these things are illegal, and you should know that you absolutely should call the school and let them know what is happening, but you should also call the police. I'm going to stop right here. I don't know, Julia, if we can have questions right now.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, we can take some questions if you.
Because I'm making a left turn and I'm going to change the subject. So
Okay.
if there are any questions on bullying, I'd be happy to answer those questions right now.
Okay. And just as a reminder, if you have a question, please type it into the comment box and we'll ask it. I do know we did get one question about what, so this is the question. So what should I do if it's too late and my kids are already on social media? How can I set up those boundaries with them now, even though it's already, the horse has already left the barn?
Good question. It's like I said, and no judgment, because we did not grow up with this as parents. We were not parented about how to handle social media, and how old should my kid be before they can have a phone? How old should they be before they have an app or a Facebook account or whatever? So don't feel bad about yourself because we didn't grow up with this. We didn't know how to do this. And we're still figuring it out, truthfully. So my answer to that question would be, think of an example in your own life that did not involve social media with your kids, in which you may have let them have something before you really thought about it. Think about how that went and then how you self-corrected. You can use that same learning example in social media. So maybe you're like, uh-oh, and you had a sit-down conversation with your kids. Maybe you just kind of said it and your kids were arguing with you and you're like, I don't care, too late, this is how it's gonna be. Maybe your kids really pushed you and pushed a lot of limits and you're like, all right, if you push limits, I'm gonna push discipline and this is how, and these are what levels of discipline you can expect. I know that I'm making this sound easy and it's not. So some of the things you can absolutely do are, if they continue to push limits on their phone or on devices or whatever, you can, it would not be my first step or my first skill to use with kids, but if you've already laid down reasonable limits with your kids about social media and electronics, and they just keep walking over the limits, you can remove the devices. And that is limit. But before then, I would do things like, here are the rules. Here's what apps you can have. I need your password for you to use the app. I'm gonna look on your app occasionally. Here's when you can play games. I'm gonna stand over your shoulder and watch you sometimes because I wanna know what things are being said while you play games. I wanna know who you talk to the most online. I'm gonna read your text messages from time to time. Those are for younger kids, and again, well, you know your kids, so sometimes those rules are completely appropriate for teenagers as old as 16 and 17 too, truthfully. But you know your kids and you know what levels of rules will work and would be appropriate and healthy for them. And then don't back down. If you know what's healthy, those are the rules that need to stay. if you have, I don't know what your family situation is, but if you have two parents in the home, it's always helpful also to have both parents on the same page before you have those conversations with the kids, because your kids will mom and pop you about what rules are going to happen as they try to do that with all of the other rules in the household. So do make sure, if you have a spouse or a parenting partner, to make sure that you're on the same page before you give your kid the rules. Coolio. Any other questions?
Great. Yeah, we do have one more question, and this one is actually from Facebook. But the question is, what can you do if you notice that your kid is the bully? And so your
That,
kid is the one doing the bullying.
yeah, excellent question. Thank you for being honest with yourself and knowing that your kids aren't perfect. None of us are perfect. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, probably all of us were the bully at some point. And so it's good to acknowledge that. What happens when our kids are the bully? We have to have the same rules, essentially. So when we think of the rules, we always kind of think of those rules as protecting the victim. But if we have the same rules, we're also protecting the bully, right? Hey, you're going to get in trouble if you say this. Hey, you could find yourself out of school or disciplined in some way if you do this. So if we keep the same rules, they protect the bully also. So what I mean by the same rules is we have to monitor the apps and our websites. We are going to get on and look at our kids' interactions with things. If we still if we still think that our kid is finding loopholes through the process, and we find proof of that, then we can make further restrictions on what our kids' access is to electronics, including you can only have your device if I'm staring over your shoulder while you're on it, which is high maintenance, and therefore it isn't going to be a lot of tech time, and your kid will hate that, but that's a consequence. You can absolutely take away electronics. Hey kid, if you can't be trusted to have your electronics safely, you're not going to have them for a certain amount of time. And here's how you can earn them back by showing these positive behaviors and taking accountability for what your online behaviors were. How can you make it up to the kid that you bullied would be a good question and a good disciplinary response to how do you get your tech back. So those kinds of punishments can be really effective. And just to say it again is, how can you right the wrong with the kid that you bullied before you can increase your time on tech or even have your devices back? Good question. I love that question. What do I do if my kid is the bully? Very often, it's the same rules. Cool. What I'm going to, thanks Julia. What I'm going to do is move on to the next topic in this webinar, which is how does social media play a role in body image, and why is this a big deal? How does it affect my kids? The first dealio is this. When I talk about body image, what is that? Body image is how I look at myself and how I feel about it. And when I talk about myself, I'm talking about my body. Body image issues range from general dissatisfaction with your body to really obsessive thoughts and feelings and all-consuming thoughts about your body that you think about all the time throughout the day. This is totally based on comparison to others. So in theory, a person who had never seen another person would never have body image issues. It's only people who compare themselves to other people. Social media is available 24/7. People can constantly look at other people and their bodies, and then they can feel bad about their bodies in comparison to what other people look like. This is a separate issue than what we grew up with as kids. Of course, we all as kids had body image issues, especially as we made that swing into our teenage years. But the difference is now, again, is social media lets us look at people 24/7. And it's a lot of comparison, especially when you think of the idea that when you look at things on social media, we tend to look at either advertisements or movies or clips or videos that purposefully show pretty people. Or when we're looking at our friends and our loved ones, we tend to only post the pictures that make us look good, right? is kind of something that a lot of people do. So we're comparing ourselves to something that is falsely above where we think we should be. And I'll talk more about that idea. Who is affected by body image issues? Before I read this list, I'm just going to say everybody. Everybody can be affected by body image issues, and we are affected by them more with the onset and invention of social media. Fun fact, 80% of women, this is from a study put out by Harvard. I wrote it down somewhere, I don't see it. I'm like 90% sure it's Harvard. 80% of women don't like the way they look. They don't like their bodies. And 34% of men report the same thing. If I were to guess what those numbers mean, I do think that women are, because there's a spread, right? 80% versus 34. I do tend to think that women are raised with an increased level of double standards that men don't have. And I think that explains some of the discrepancy between those numbers. I also think that men lie. So I tend to think that more than 34% of men report some concerns about their body. Who is at the most risk on this issue? Teens are the most at risk, according to most studies, but no age group is immune. One demographic that is much less at risk than other people are coupled people. If you have a romantic partner and you feel pretty good in that relationship, you're much less at risk to body image issues than a single person would be. Folks already struggling with depression, isolation, loneliness, rigid rules about how they should look or be, are also much more prone to negative body image issues than other folks. Why is it important to talk about body image? Many of the same reasons that I mentioned with bullying are going to show up on this list. If we highlight especially our girls, which is what the research just said, and we think about girls who are constantly comparing themselves to something that they should be pretty or ideal, those girls, and boys, but I'm highlighting girls, are much more susceptible to poor self-esteem, depression, and both of those ideas, like I said a little earlier, and we'll talk about more again in a second, poor self-esteem and depression increase the risk of suicide. So I'm talking about those two ideas in relation to body image, and then connecting body image to perhaps a higher risk of suicide. Eating disorders. Somebody can, again, be physically unhealthy, very much so, because of a body image problem. That's the extreme end of what I'm talking about, would be an eating disorder like anorexia, which can be fatal in its worst instances, but I do include it in this conversation. People with poor body images issues can be much more likely to develop a substance abuse habit. They can have lower grades at school. They can have decreased social engagement, and they can have increased social anxiety. All of those things together make it more uncomfortable for girls and boys to engage positively at school, not only just in terms of grades, but also in terms of things like making friends, participating positively in a sports team or a music team, anything like that. These are some of the symptoms of body image problems and why it's a big deal. Here are some fun social media facts. Florida State University did this study. Women who looked at Facebook for just 20 minutes reported greater dissatisfaction with their bodies than women who did not look at Facebook the prior 20 minutes. Just in that one 20-minute interaction of looking at Facebook, they scroll through and they're looking at other people and thinking, I don't look that good. I wish I had bigger, I wish I had smaller, whatever it is. just in those 20 minutes is the power of Facebook. Average kid media time per day, look at that. That's a national stat put out by a national government health administration. For each hour of Facebook time that a kid spends online, he is more likely to develop anorexia or bulimia. Let's check that fact out. Each hour of Facebook time, kids are more likely to develop an eating disorder. It goes up. And here's the exception, and it goes back to what I was suggesting earlier with bullying. The exception is when parents are involved on their kids' Facebook site. And then somehow the whole process becomes normalized if parents spend that time with their kids on social media. Another fun fact, in 2015, the average adult female is 5'4" and 144 pounds. And check out the average model, she's 5'10" and 110 pounds. So we're bombarded with all of these images of what society is telling us should be ideal and should be perfect. And it's very far removed from what reality actually is. Here's how to intervene. We want to encourage our kids to have healthy habits. And these are all of the basics. So some of these are not things that you haven't heard before, or things that you're probably already showing your kids. One of the reasons I mention it now is because we're all in a national crisis, and we're all experiencing a national trauma. When that happens, all of our brains just kind of go whoop and shut down, and we don't think of the obvious things to do sometimes because we all have trauma brain. So here are some of the basics, just to kind of put that back into our brain. We want to make sure that our kids are eating healthy. We want to make sure that they're sleeping enough. We want to make sure that they're moving and exercising. And we want to make sure that they're spending time with people, actual people, not online, right? Those are just some of the basics. If our kids do all of those things every day, they're a lot less likely to develop some other problems. One of the things that is especially helpful for girls, I think the study that this comes from is specifically on girls, but why I think maybe boys were not represented is because boys are more likely to engage in team sports anyway. But specifically for girls, it was this amazing number, like 11 or 12 times less likely to have a body image issue than girls who did not engage in a team sport. Girls who engaged in team sports were this enormous percentage of stuff less likely to have body image issues. It was amazing. So soccer, lacrosse, cheerleading, a Frisbee team, like it really just said any organized team sport that had, it really did quantify it. It was like 10 matches a year over the course of the school year. Amazing. Team sports. I think something that happens with that process is that girls support each other. Girls can be athletic and successful at a task that had nothing to do with how pretty they are or what they look like. And they stopped having the degree of body image issues in a team sport. Encourage pro-social activities and friendships. Those could be made in team sports, but they could also be made in any other extracurricular activity, in a church, with family, with whoever it is. But they should not be online, and they should be with actual people doing actual things that in life, with real, in reality. Encourage pro-social activities. Volunteering is another good one. Encourage kids to do what they're good at. Whatever that is, if it's writing, if it's music, if it's cooking, if it's reading, if it's sports, if it's student government, if it's whatever it is, if your kid is good at it, encourage them to do it. The reason for that is that self-efficacy, which is believing you're good at something, produces self-esteem, which is believing you're worthwhile. To say that again, encourage kids to do something they feel good at so that they know that they're good people, is really the process that this is. This is how to intervene with some errors in thinking, which is what social media does to warp our sense of reality. We know that artificial beauty online is a real thing. A lot of time is spent on hair and makeup and even changing with graphics the image that is used to promote a beautiful person on social media or in a magazine. It's fake. People don't really look like that. The other reality is that people look different. Genetic and biological realities happen. Some people are prettier than other people, but everybody goes through ugly moments also. And we want to encourage our kids to believe that some of the images that they're looking at are not real. And then even if somebody they're looking at they think is more attractive than them, there's a reason for that, and that's just how it is. And we're good people regardless of how we look, is something that we want to encourage our kids to believe. I've been demonizing social media, but it ain't all bad. Here are some good things that social media presents to people. These are a lot of campaigns online that promote body image in a good way, in a fair way, in a normalized way. The one that I've seen the most on here is the Dove campaign for self-esteem. And that is a campaign that has pictures of lots of different women of different sizes and shapes and colors and ethnicities, women who look like everybody, and portray them in just a simple but really beautiful way. And that is a campaign that I have seen a lot. And it's very pro-person and pro-personality rather than anti-body. But it's also pro-body. It makes all shapes and sizes look good and feel good about themselves. I'm going to move on right now to suicide and social media. So what I want to say about this, one of the reasons I'm talking about suicide is that both of the first two things, bullying and body image, have a negative impact on suicide, both in terms of suicide ideation, where people are just thinking about suicide, and suicide attempts and suicide completion, where people really do try and sometimes actually do kill themselves. So does social media have a direct impact on suicide? And I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth for a second. On the left, I have some slide stuff that says, does the web increase suicide? And the answer is a little bit, maybe yes. Some sites have been shown to increase suicide rates. Having said that, these sites are awful. These are sites and chat rooms where people are encouraging people to kill themselves. It's kind of gross. I'm going to move right on from that. Don't go to those sites, they're bad. The next thing on here that is more basic and applies to almost everybody. Increased screen time does sometimes increase the likelihood of depression in young people. I think the reason for that is not purely that they're looking at the screen. I don't think screen time causes depression. I think it's much more likely that the more time we spend looking at our screen, the less time we spend actually with real people, and that isolation is a factor that can drive suicidal thoughts and depression. Does that make sense? I hope so. On the right side, does the web decrease suicide? And again, that seems like yes, in the right circumstances. There's a lot of stuff that is pro-mental health online, especially nowadays when we're all stuck up at home. The main way that we're communicating with our family and friends is online. We can call them, we can video chat, we can text them, but in any of those circumstances, we spend a little bit of time or a lot of time looking at a screen, much as like I'm doing with you guys right now. So the internet is not bad, and I don't want to demonize it. It has a lot of really wonderful uses. In these cases specifically, where we're reaching out to connect with the purpose of connecting, that decreases isolation and decreases depression and promotes anti-self-harm thoughts, which then in turn decreases suicidality. So does the web decrease suicide? And the answer is yes. So both sides of my mouth I'm talking about. Suicide stats in Colorado. I'm going to have a lot of slides that have a lot of stats, and I'm not going to read them all. They were kind of geared toward a larger presentation, but I am going to highlight some stuff on these slides. The second thing on here, which is kind of sad, suicide is the leading cause of death, of injury death in Colorado. Uh, and that was based on 2017 data. Right now, and this is a scary fact, nationally, the leading cause of death in America is COVID. And suicide is fourth right now, behind heart disease and behind cancer. More suicide stats in Colorado. Colorado has consistently ranked among the top 10 states for suicide death rates as long as we've kept these statistics. We don't know why that is. There have been thoughts that Colorado's elevation may play a role in that, but there are other states where people live at high altitudes and they don't have a high suicide rate. Many places all over the world. Colorado has long been a place that people move in and out of. There's a lot of coming and going. And there's been some thought that people's displacement from their friends and family and people they're close to, they move here and they don't necessarily know anybody, might increase isolation, might decrease the amount of people that they can go to and turn to for help. Maybe that factor has something to do with Colorado's proportionally high suicide rate in comparison with other states. But we don't have a definitive answer for that. Here are some stats, again, for Colorado. Again, I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to say suicide is a big deal, but I'm not going to go through these numbers and kind of be depressing right now. I think we have enough depression in our life with isolation right now. Something I am going to highlight, because this one is always really important. One of the groups demographically that is always at most risk for suicide thoughts and suicidal behaviors is the LGBTQ plus population. The rate of suicide attempts is 4 times greater for LGBTQ youth and 2 times greater for questioning youth than that of straight youth. Meaning that if you have a kiddo, especially if they're a teenager, a young teenager, their risk of being depressed and of trying to kill themselves is 4 times higher than your straight child. In a national study, in this next bullet, in a national study, 40%, that's almost half of transgender adults reported having made at least one suicide attempt. 92% of those individuals reported having attempted suicide before they turned 25, meaning that they were young, right? I say this out loud, because, not to scare anybody, but if your kid is identifying as gay or lesbian or transgender or questioning or some kind of sexual minority in general, it is okay, and you should ask them if they're depressed. Have you ever had suicidal thoughts? You're not going to make them kill themselves by asking. It doesn't work that way. It is safe to ask. It is safer to ask. If your kid is an LGBTQ youth, ask them, have you had any suicidal thoughts? Can I help you in any way? And it's important. It'll decrease the risk of them doing anything harmful to themselves and will increase the risk that you can love them for a long time longer. How to look for suicide thoughts and behaviors. What to look for. If they are feeling depressed or hopeless, I think we often identify depressed as being sad all the time, but take one more step outside of that. It is certainly sadness, but it is also isolation if your kid never wants to come out of his room. And I don't mean a normal teenager, leave me alone, mom. I mean literally never. They never want to come out of the room. That kind of isolation can be depressed and it can be hopeless. If your kid never gets excited about anything, if your kid used to love stuff and isn't excited about the same stuff anymore, all of those things can be signs that they're depressed. If your kid is feeling helpless, like they can't do anything for themselves and they can do nothing for their future. If your kiddo has had a previous suicide attempt, the odds go up that they might have another. It's a high risk factor. If they have a loss of interest in activities, like I mentioned, if their grades are going down, if your kiddo is always angry or irritable, if your kiddo has an unexplained mood improvement, if they just suddenly look happy all of a sudden, that can be a sign of suicide. Again, I fully own, having worked with teenagers for a long time, a lot of these symptoms on here are symptoms of being a teenager, not of being suicidal, right? But know your own kids and know what your kid looks like normally. And if your kid changes, either for better or for worse, investigate and ask them, hey kid, what's going on? Are you depressed? Are you having suicidal thoughts? It's okay to ask. What to look for, again, is a change in appetite, difficulty concentrating, history of depression, sadness, crying, low energy, lack of support. All those things can be signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. Here are some resources for suicidal support. So if you don't have anything else written down or in your mind and you need help immediately, call 911. Jefferson County has a mental health trained police task force, and they will send officers that are, to some degree, trained in mental health support. So they're not gonna show up and have your kid be in trouble. They're there to help. Julia is gonna send this whole PowerPoint to everybody who is participating in this presentation today. So you don't have to hurriedly write things down unless you want to save it somewhere. A couple of other services I do want to highlight, though, is Colorado Crisis Services, and there's an 800 number there. If your kiddo is an LGBTQ+ youth, the Trevor Project is a suicide hotline specifically geared to talking and supporting LGBTQ youth in America. I'm gonna, again, take another, switch gears, turn left. So breathe for a minute after suicide, and then I'm going to talk about how much screen time is appropriate for our kids. The answer is complicated because nobody really agrees on it. There is no consensus for really how much a kid over the age of 6 should be spending online. There is, fortunately, some consensus for younger children, and I'm going to highlight that now. They say, this is from the American Academy of Pediatrics, up to 18 months, your kid shouldn't be looking at a screen at all. That's what they say. Is that completely realistic? I'm going to say probably not. I think while you're at dinner, while you're doing the laundry, like whatever household task you're doing, and you have your 1-year-old staring at a television while you do that, so that you can have some peace while you do that, I think it's probably realistic. Having said that, this is what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends. If your kiddo is 2 to 5 years old, excuse me, they recommend no more than an hour per day. 1 hour per day includes television. Again, I don't know how realistic that is, especially nowadays where we're stuck at home and there's limited engagement in activities that we used to depend on to occupy and entertain our children. So again, probably not realistic, but that's what the AAP recommends. Here's the thing that I want to spend more time talking about. If your kiddo is 6 and up, there just isn't any agreement about how much screen time is appropriate. It recommends know your kids and know what is helpful for them. I'm going to talk more about that. The quote that they use is, for kids over the age of 6, for healthy kids, an average day includes school, homework time, at least 1 hour of physical activity, social contact, and sleep, which is anywhere from 8 to 12 hours for your kid, depending on how much sleep your kid needs. And whatever is left over can be screen time. So really, that's not a lot of time, especially if your kid, has a 10 to 12 hour sleep habit. That really isn't a lot of time for screen time. So they should be doing some homework. They should be doing at least 1 hour of physical activity. They should be hanging out with friends and family. They should be sleeping. And then think about it, after meals, there shouldn't be that much time for screens. Some signs that your kid is spending too much time on a screen. Your kid has sore hands. If they're doing this all day and their hands hurt, it's bad and they should slow down or stop. If your kids have headaches from staring at the screens all day, I know life right now is a little bit different because they're potentially looking at a screen almost all day while they're at school. And that has taken me some transition time. My face hurts at the end of the day. So that's not necessarily the same kind of symptom, but on a Saturday or Sunday and they're all day, it's a sign. If your kids have anxiety when they're away from their device, if they feel like they're not connected, if they have to check the next thing, if they feel like they're missing something because they're away from their device, that can be a sign they're spending too much time online. If your kid routinely has dreams,
Where's Kenzie? Outside?
could you please turn your microphone off, please? Thank you. If your kid has dreaming about social media games and they do that routinely, that can be a sign that their brain is too fixated on their device and that they've been spending too much time on the device. If your kid would rather hang out with their electronic friends, I think you know what I mean by that, than their actual friends, if they would rather spend time texting people than actually hanging out with their friends, that can be a sign that they're spending too much time online. And here I am at the end of our presentation. Does anybody have, I'm going to stop for other questions about anything else that we've talked about today. Thank you for listening to us and engaging with us.
Yep, so we've got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Our first one is actually from Facebook, and it says, what can you do when your 16-year-old shuts down and even stops coming out of their room and is refusing to eat when you take their device away?
That's a sign that you probably did the right thing, would be my advice. I think your kid is having a pouting reaction to not getting their way, and that spending too much time online has stunted their social skills, so that they have no better way to let you know that they don't know what to do with their time than by pouting. That sounds harsh, but I think it's true. The other, so what you do is the question with that. You can say, I'm going to take your device away for this amount of time. And then you have to give it back when you said you will. But the flip side is you want to encourage them to believe that they have to do something social to get their device back. So they have to come to dinner. They have to watch TV with the family. They have to come and sit in the living room and be present. Like keep the standard of social engagement realistic, because sometimes, as we all know, teenagers just aren't going to be glowing superstars in our lives, and that's okay. However, if they're pouting because you took away their device and they're refusing to come out of their rooms, the thing you have to do to make it an expectation that they get their device back on some level is to show some level of positive pro-social in-person behavior. Yep. Next question.
Thank you. Yeah, so our next question is, during this time of staying at home, my kids are on social media a lot more than usual, which, considering the circumstances, I'm okay with. But what would be some healthy boundaries to set?
It's a good question. So we're doing two things right now that we were not parented for when we were kids. We did not have a pandemic when we were children, and we did not have social media when we were children. So on some level, we have to make up the rules as we go along. I think you're probably right. If your kid is spending more time on social media right now, I think that's probably your kid's way of reaching out to friends and family, and I think that that's probably appropriate. Some of the things I mentioned earlier, so let me go back. Here's a list of some things that you can know. If any of these things on this list are true, it's a sign that they're spending too much time online. I would highlight maybe your kid's anxiety level. If after your kid unplugs and your kid has anxiety about, oh, I have to go get my phone again right now. What if I miss what my friend did or said? I have to talk to my friend right now online, or whatever it is. Those can be signs that your kid is spending too much time plugged in, and that he should unplug for a while longer. Um, Especially in the time of our pandemic when everybody has a little bit of heightened anxiety. We want to check in with our kids about their anxiety levels. And we can ask that by saying, hey, are you worried right now? What are some of your thoughts about what's the pandemic? What are your thoughts about going back to school in the fall? How do you feel about not seeing your friends right now while you're at school? How do you feel about not seeing your friends at all right now? You can ask a lot of those questions and kind of check in with their level of anxiety without really talking about social media directly at all. Because I think really what you meant was your kid is taking care of himself by reaching out to people on social media, and that's fine. And you've already kind of recognized that. But here are some of the things on this slide right here that I think are important to recognize as potential signs that they're spending too much time plugged in. Any other questions?
Yes, so we've got one more question. And this person wants to know, how can I promote like positive self-esteem and socializing when we're all stuck at home all of the time? So my kid's not able to play on a sports team or see their friends, and most of their interactions are online. So how can I be promoting positive self-esteem and social interactions?
Yep, it's a good question. So it's tricky right now because one of the main ways that kids develop social skills and self-esteem and pro-social norms and behaviors is by interacting with other people. That level of interaction has been cut. It's been snipped. And so how do you do that as a parent? One of the main ways you would do that is by interacting yourself with your kids. I don't know who you're interacting with right now. If you have, some people are kind of engaging with other family members right now, even if you don't live with them. I'm not putting out an opinion about whether that's okay or not. I'm just saying it's true. And to the extent that you are able to have activities in person with your kid, with the people that your kid can engage with. Those activities can include games outside, those with you as a parent. Those activities can include board games. You can read with each other. I don't know what kind of kid your kid is. You can watch a movie and talk about it. You can watch. I like this. This is annoying to some people, but it can be good with kids to stop a movie and pause it and then say, what did you think about what that character in the movie just did? And then you can kind of normalize behaviors and interactions, and pro-social or the wrong behavior is something you might want to highlight. All of those things are possible. Online stuff is inevitable, I think, right now. We've all already been wired on some level to do some online stuff, whether it be for school or work or for our own pleasure. So it's pervasive in our life. And the idea in and of itself of using online stuff to promote the kinds of skills you're talking about is okay and should happen. It's the fine line of what's too much that you have to be aware of with your own kid, and then just know your kid about when it's too much. And that sounds probably like a non-answer in terms of social media, but it's a good answer. Know what kinds of things to look for with your kid. So something I have not said, I don't think, is ask your own kid, how do I know, like you just looking at Peter, how do I, mom, know when you've been spending too much time online? What kinds of things will you do, or how will I know that? And your kid will have an answer. So pay attention for those kinds of things and then later to say, if you're concerned, remember, Peter, when you told me that you would be doing these kinds of things if you spent too much time online? Well, that's what I'm seeing, and I think we should scale back. And your kid might grumble about it, but he's the one who made the boundary and you helped him make it. So that's okay. I hope that was good information. Are there any more questions?
I think that's it, Joel. Thank you again so much for presenting, and thank you to everyone who has been participating in our webinar today. We appreciate it. Just some final thoughts. Please know that Jefferson Center is here for you through the good times and the bad. We're going to be here with you every step of the way. We're open and accepting new patients via telephone and telehealth appointments right now. And we've also adapted by developing innovative ways to provide remote care for both our new and existing clients. You can visit our website at jcmh.org or follow us on Facebook for more resources and information. And you can also reach us by calling 303-425-0300. So again, thank you for joining us today and have a great day.